You are listening to Talking Star Wars. Welcome back to our expanded universe review of novels released after Disney's purchase of the Star Wars franchise. Taking a look at the next two pieces of media, I'm a little conflicted because, one, uh, Lords of the Sith we've just spoken about in the Spotlight episode, and Dark Disciple when we spoke about Fallen Jedi. So maybe with these two, I would say listen to our other episodes. But how would you say Lords of the Sith? Uh, Brief overview, and how does that tie in as far as our ranking goes?
Yeah, so in case you haven't listened to our previous episodes, so our next work we're going to talk about is Lords of the Sith. This takes place between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope before the start of the Rebel show. So about 10 to 12 years into the rise of the Empire. And it is about Darth Vader and Darth Sidious, the Emperor, going to Ryloth and Cham Syndulla's attempt to assassinate them by blowing up their Star Destroyer. And doesn't even know they're going to be on board. He's just trying to blow up a Star Destroyer.
Mhm.
And hey, the Emperor is on board.
It's the most important Star Destroyer that you could possibly destroy.
But he was trying to travel incognito to catch some what they thought were corrupt Imperial officials who were there. But then all of their plots, from the corrupt Imperial official to Palpatine's attempts to secure power, to Darth Vader's attempts to prove himself to Vader, to Cham Syndulla's attempts to fight against the Empire, all crash into each other into this story of explosions. Mm-hmm. So, as a work of fiction, I'll give that one a 4 out of 5.
Hence our decision to create a spotlight episode on it.
Yeah. And as a work of canon, I'm going to also put it at a 4 out of 5, pretty high up there, because it establishes more of Darth Vader and Palpatine's relationship. It shows how Rebel cells operated before the rise of the Rebel Alliance and how difficult it was for them to achieve real change without the backing of a larger organization, politically, financially, and militarily. And it's just well written as far as the interior environment of Vader and seeing their relationship and seeing how the weight that weighs on someone like Cham Syndulla, a rebel leader.
So as far as our villain novels, this one is a bit of a step up compared to Tarkin.
Yeah, I would say Tarkin was great at exploring its character. The actual plot it went through was fine. Lords of the Sith has a far more immediate plot, which does it a lot of favors as far as giving stronger occurrences and events for the characters to react to. It had a much stronger antagonist in the character of Cham Syndulla, who is already established, and gives him a lot of it, even though he never knows face to face. So, and it even has a third subplot with a corrupt Imperial lieutenant who's feeding information to Cham Syndulla. So
betraying the Emperor and Vader,
but for his own profit, intending to betray Cham Syndulla, but then Cham blackmailing him in return. So we get. So I would say the plot is tighter, and so Lords of the Sith I would say is great for anyone who wants to see not Emperor Palpatine but Darth Sidious at the height of his power, and Darth Vader cutting their way through a backwater planet, surviving assassination attempts. You really want Cham Syndulla to succeed at killing them, and he doesn't, because we see how terrible. I mean, Vader and Sidious do some heinous things in this novel, and the regime on Ryloth is doing heinous things. Especially if you enjoyed the Ryloth arc in A Bad Batch, this is almost a direct continuation of that, where you see Cham driven underground, estranged from his daughter already, and doing his best to fight against the Empire.
So many payoffs as far as story connections go.
Yeah.
And I imagine, is there any humor in this book? Because Vader and Sidious have a very bitchy relationship. Like looking at their segment in the Kenobi show, where Vader, you seemed a little muddled on this Kenobi topic.
There is some
clouded.
There is some dark humor in this novel. A lot of it comes from this corrupt Imperial official who thinks he's so smart to get one over on Cham Syndulla, because he's the second to the actual Moff of the system, who's just this layabout, corrupt, do nothing official. But he's just completely outplayed by Cham Syndulla, and is so there's some dark humor there, and in the relationship between Vader and Palpatine. But most part, it's a very serious novel. It even touches on things such as sexual slavery on behalf of Twi'leks. Cham Syndulla's second, you might even call her a serial killer, where she has an MO about going and finding a and like every month she goes and she finds an Imperial in the red light district of the Ryloth and murders him.
Mhm.
She even has a safe house she goes to, so it's very ritualistic.
Yeah.
So it does not shy away from the trauma because she is an escaped former
Mhm.
enslaved person herself.
Mhm.
So yeah, definitely some heavier stuff in this novel. It is not, I would say, appropriate for anyone below the ages of 14 or 15. Um, but if you want the darker, more brutal side of Star Wars, you want to see a Star Destroyer get blown up by bombs, and you want to see people adapting to how Darth Vader attacks and doing their best to work around him, knowing that they can't defeat him, but still blowing up the Star Destroyer that he's on. And you want to see characters acting rationally, if not always intelligently, and well written characters, I would recommend Lords of the Sith.
Excellent. So, the next book, Dark's Disciple. Again, we spoke about it in our Fallen Jedi episode, but what's a little bit of background here?
So Dark Disciple is, again, it's one of these novels that was adapted after the Disney acquisition from pre-existing material.
Mhm.
This was going to be a 4 to 6 episode arc in one of the unproduced seasons of the Clone Wars, and it was adapted into a novel. This is probably just as dark and as adult as our previous novel. So Dark Disciple has two primary characters, Asajj Ventress and Quinlan Voss.
And timeline-wise, does this take place after the Clone Wars that we've
No,
seen?
Dooku is still alive.
Okay,
So this takes place before, towards the end of the Clone Wars,
before
but
Revenge of the Sith.
but before the Outer Rim sieges and Revenge of the Sith.
Gotcha.
So Asajj Ventress at this point has become a bounty hunter, but has never forgotten her a grudge against Count Dooku, her former master. And Quinlan Voss has a mission as the best undercover Jedi on the Jedi Council to go undercover, pretend to be a fallen Jedi, and go kill Dooku. They the Palpatine either to put pressure. I actually believe they do this without consulting Palpatine because Palpatine otherwise would have warned Dooku.
Mhm.
So independently, the Jedi Council decides we're going to assassinate Count Dooku,
Mhm.
which is a big step, and it actually gives Quinlan Voss and Obi-Wan Kenobi some hesitation that they're condoning an assassination. But and this is a much more personal novel because Quinlan Voss and Asajj Ventress fall in love, and it is not a healthy relationship in that, at first at least, because they're both with each other under false pretenses,
Mhm.
but it is a very passionate and intimate relationship, which does not shy away from depicting that at all, which is almost a first in Star Wars.
Yeah, because that wouldn't have come across in the cartoon. That would have been very sleight of hand, kind of glossed over.
No, I mean, we have them in bed together, and we have them talking about being physically intimate, and
Mhm.
we have them both thinking it's a bad idea and doing it anyway.
Otherwise, there's just the uh, revelation that Anakin and Padme have conceived a child, and that is the only other glimmer of sexuality in the Star Wars universe,
Yeah,
which we'll get to on another day.
so it is not is a novel that does not shy away from sexuality like some other Star Wars novels does,
Or trilogies do.
but so other than this, the one cornerstone of this novel is the relationship between Asajj Ventress and Quinlan Voss, and then we also get some chapters from Obi-Wan Kenobi's view where he's concerned about Quinlan because Quinlan does for some of the novel fall to the dark side. Um, Seduced in several ways by Asajj Ventress, but then Ventress herself is reminded of her better self because Quinlan Voss reminds her in many ways to her former Jedi Master, um, which then casts some weird aspects of the relationship. But the whole thing is weird.
Mhm.
So, if anyone who's seen Revenge of the Sith, they fail in their attempt to kill Count Dooku, and it does not go well for anyone. So, it's almost a tragedy of a novel from beginning to end when you know they're going to fail in their goal. So you're in there to watch the train wreck of their relationship and their plot. It also has some cameos from other characters. Again, Obi-Wan has a few viewpoint chapters. Asajj pays Boba Fett, Bossk, and some other bounty hunters to be a distraction on one of their jobs. And then we see Count Dooku unleash his Force lightning. But the primary focus is on the dark side of the Force, Asajj and Quinlan.
Gotcha. So, as far as how this stands up as a general story in itself, you said this is a more personal story, this is more of a tragedy. As a work of prose, how would you rate it?
I always give this one a 4.5 out of 5. There's a reason it's one of the most well-known Star Wars novels and was one of the first ones that was really recognized when Disney started pushing out materials. You could tell it was made by a professional writer. I mean, she was the author that had written the scripts and directly adapted them to a novel.
This is, in fact, the first book that Alex has lent me in my attempt to get caught up in some way. And I'm still working through it, but I am the very antithesis of a voracious reader. I read sloth-like. Uh, so it seems like, as far as quality-wise, it is highly ranked. But as far as connectivity, do you need to be a fan of the Clone Wars to enjoy this book?
I would say so, because then you're going to know why Asajj Ventress is a bounty hunter you should care about, and you're going to have met Quinlan Voss before,
Mhm.
though it will contextualize who Quinlan is for you during the novel. But you really need to have a feeling of the enmity between Asajj Ventress and Count Dooku to really grasp the weight of the plot of this novel. And you need to understand the Night Sisters of Dathomir and their dark side traditions to understand the rituals that Asajj Ventress uses to try to give them an edge over Count Dooku.
Sure.
So if you love a tragic love story, this book is for you. If you like a more dark and personal Star Wars story, also for you. If you love the Clone Wars and you really want to know what happened to Asajj Ventress, why is she not around by the time A New Hope comes up? Where did she go? Uh, this one is also for you. If you're looking for grand space battles and um, happy protagonists who succeeded their goals, book is not for you. It's right there. So this is a dark, sometimes brutal novel about the vagaries of war and the difficulties of love for two damaged individuals.
Yeah, and I look forward to finishing it at some point this year, 2023. Uh, I know absolutely nothing about the next entry.
So the next book is Lost Stars, which is our first one, as you'll notice, that entirely deals with two new characters, are the main characters, who have not previously appeared and were created entirely for this novel.
Do they show up anywhere else after this novel?
Not that I'm aware of. But this novel spans about 20 years.
Ooh.
So Lost Stars follows two friends from a Republic planet, both of whom go into the Imperial Academy,
Mhm.
one who stays loyal to the Empire out of a sense of duty, and one who defects to the rebellion. And they are, of course, in love and lovers for most of this, from childhood friends to lovers,
Mhm.
but they remain on opposite sides of the battle. Um, the crux. So the first part of the novel we get. It reminds me of a recent episode of Andor, where we get a big sense of this local culture,
Mhm.
where they come from a society with these different castes.
Mhm.
So there are two different castes as well. Her family is older and more traditional. His family is newer and less traditional and more tied to the imperial power structure. But they all acknowledge and understand the strong culture of their home planet, and they are friends. And to get off the planet, they both dream of flying has been their goal for their whole life. And so then they both join the Imperial Academy. He is eventually trained as a ace TIE fighter pilot, and she then enters the officer track aboard Star Destroyers. After the destruction of Alderaan by the Death Star, uh, they trade messages back and forth because they're both horrified.
Mhm.
And but for her, the oath she has sworn to follow the Empire supersedes everything else. And they trade messages and misunderstand each other. He believes that they have agreed to defect to the Empire, or to defect from the Empire to the Rebellion, and she believes that they have no choice and they must stay loyal to the Empire and try to change it from within. And so he defects, expecting her to follow, and she is horrified that he would betray his oath and
Mhm.
join the Rebellion. And so that extends all the way through the entire Rebellion period. He flies an X-wing. She rises through the ranks to eventually, even though she's very young, from a lieutenant to a second lieutenant, and keeps getting battlefield promotions as more and more of the Empire starts dying, all the way to the Battle of Jakku, where he's the leader of a squadron wing. We see them both at the Battle of Endor. We see them both at the Battle of Yavin. She's actually the shuttle pilot who goes and picks up Vader from his TIE fighter after his hyperdrive is damaged, which is a
Who
terrifying
goes
moment.
spiraling from the Death Star after Han shot him?
Yep, so she's one of only
Yeah.
two or three people who knows how Darth Vader survived the destruction of the Death Star. And yeah, there's a humorous moment where uh, one of the main characters, he goes back to their home planet to help her in a family situation, and then they're intimate for the first time and fall in love and admit their feelings to each other. So then he returns to the rebellion after having taken leave, and he reports to General Riken and says, "Sir, I must tell you on my leave I fraternized with an imperial officer. And he says, "What? You left the rebellion to go fraternize and sleep with an Imperial officer?" And he says, "Yes, sir. No information was exchanged, but yes."
No information was
But
exchanged.
other things were exchanged. And and this is where they are. Again, it's a more healthy relationship maybe than in Dark Disciple, but it's not a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
And they have these ideological differences, but they neither can convince the other to match their own views. So, as you can tell by how I'm talking about it, I really like this novel.
Gotcha.
I won't tell you how it ends, but I mean, and it is, but it's doing the thing where it's telling a compelling personal story about our two main characters, um, but then also using that to show the kind of conflict that would be between families and others throughout the imperial period, because they join the um, imperial military about halfway through the imperial period, and then all the way through the rebellion period. So we see a big chunk of their lives where they're diametrically opposed, and we get little vignettes in this novel of other families and other characters. Honestly, and this is, I think, a more adult YA novel in that it's not terribly brutal or terribly explicit about what happens, but I'm gonna go ahead and rate this one as a prose sense 5 out of 5 for its tight story structure and its compelling characters as a work fiction.
Very surprising considering it's a there's no how do you call it, fan service. This isn't
There's a little bit of
the
fan service
Han
in that she
Leia
was the shuttle
story.
pilot who go and rescued Darth Vader as an excuse to go and show Darth Vader in the novel.
That's a little bit, yeah. But there's no "you'll be dead" guy. I'm guessing
What do you mean?
the Rogue One. I have the death sentence on 7 systems.
Oh no, we're not. Yeah, this isn't quite to that degree. Though, if you remember the Star Destroyer that Rey is scavenging.
Mm-hmm.
That's the Star Destroyer that at the end of Lost Stars crashes when they're both on it. So there's a
I'll
little.
accept that. It's R2D2 doesn't roll past the page. I'm guessing.
I think like the rebellion character might like glimpse him in the
Okay.
background, but again, they're not having a significant plot impact. It's
They're not
more
the
just
focus.
like
Yeah.
no, the focus is on these two characters and how the Empire has torn their relationship and their families apart. And I mean, it's also showing the sunk cost fallacy for the character who remains loyal to the Empire. I mean, her mother is convicted on trumped up charges. She's given battlefield promotions to roles where she's not qualified for them. She ends up at the age of like 25 commanding a Star Destroyer in the Battle of Jakku because there's no one else. Which of course goes very well. So, I want to say fraternize. That was the word. I fraternized with an Imperial officer. Throw that in later.
Gotcha.
But yeah, so General Reckon, I need to report that I have fraternized with an Imperial officer. So yeah, and as far as importance to historical canon, if you don't want to read many novels, this is a good one to read because it gives you the sense of the Empire all the way from before the Battle of Yavin all the way to the Battle of Jakku. And the Battle of Jakku, if you're not aware, is where the Imperial remnant was finally defeated, and a large chunk of it withdrew into the unknown regions, any survivors, to then eventually establish the First Order. So this is really from the victory, from the very nascent stages of the rebellion to their victory and the eventual defeat after the Battle of Endor, to the establishment of the New Republic.
Yeah, seems like a great scope. So, as far as who should read this,
I mean, I would say pretty much any Star Wars fan, and especially if you like a good love story, this is a pretty good one. I would say better love story than Dark Disciple. It's also, I mean, they're younger. If you like a good coming of age story, these are also good. And if you would like, if you just read a few Star Wars novels and want one that takes you across a broad stretch of time, and to show how two people from one culture survive in both the rebellion and the Empire, this is a good novel for you. But any Star Wars fan would enjoy Lost Stars.
yeah, two good romances, tragic romance stories back to back. By the looks of the next one, I'm going to just take a guess that this is a YA piece of shit. But let's see if you prove me wrong.
No. So our next trilogy of books are 3 books, all set between various movies in the original trilogy. One about Luke, one about Han, one about Princess Leia, and they were all released in the lead up to the release of The Force Awakens.
Are they YA?
They are.
Okay, but not pieces of shit.
No, there are some YA pieces of shit we will talk about.
Okay.
Um,
Just from this looks like something that I would have read back in the day where Luke has to go find the ancient glove of Darth Vader before the Emperor's son can find it, and it's been wiped off of the face of canon. It was wiped out of canon before Legends became Legends. But tell us, what is the weapon of a Jedi?
The first novel we're going to talk about in this trilogy is The Weapon of a Jedi, a Luke Skywalker Adventure.
So we're going to be pretty quick about these. They're YA, they're fairly light, and they're not all that important. They were released primarily as tie-in materials to The Force Awakens for anyone who had didn't have the strong nostalgia for the original trilogy that probably myself and Connor do.
Mhm.
So The Weapon of a Jedi is set between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back. And this is during the period where Luke is trying to hunt down any other shred of Jedi lore that he can. So he eventually goes to a mysterious planet. There's an old Jedi temple there, and he eventually finds a series of training droids. You know, that's the type that were used in the Jedi Temple
Yeah.
that run him through a bunch of lightsaber katas
Okay.
or lightsaber forms. And so it shows how he starts getting some lightsaber training.
That is very helpful because within the films themselves, we get to see Luke hold a lightsaber to all of a sudden dueling Vader in Empire Strikes Back without us seeing any kind of training that he's done with a lightsaber. He didn't train with a lightsaber with Yoda, as we've seen. So to have some background information as to how he gained some skill is helpful.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a junior novel. It's relatively short. It's set primarily, there's a prologue and epilogue set during the period of A Force Awakens.
Mm-hmm.
But and the events themselves are Luke goes to this planet drawn by the Jedi Temple, and learns some more lore about Jedi lightsaber techniques. So there's not a lot of depth to talk about. There's some interesting visuals, but the prose is fairly straightforward, meant for younger readers. Um, yeah, so we don't have to spend too much time. As a work of fiction, as a YA group, I'll put this at a 2.5. It's fine, maybe even a 3. It doesn't overstay its welcome. It knows what it's doing.
Mhm.
It would be enjoyable for any younger reader and anyone who wants 100% knowledge about Luke Skywalker and really enjoys seeing how Luke recovered in Jedi lore.
Mhm.
Very interesting from that perspective. And we still see more again of how the Empire cracks down and their reaction to old Jedi ruins and how they kept people away or just tried to destroy that kind of lore.
Okay, so this is for fans of Luke, fans of the Jedi, completionists.
As a work of Star Wars fiction, unless you are really into this Luke Skywalker, you can skip this one. It's not even providing you any particular thing you need to know about. If you want, I would think a better depiction of taking place immediately after this, read the arc in the Marvel comic.
Mhm.
Sorry, it's released under the same imprint that Disney releases their Marvel comics, which is why I call it that. There's an arc where Luke is captured and made to fight in a gladiatorial arena, and then spars with the captain of Scar Squadron. Who's undercover as a gladiator trainer and who has studied Jedi lightsaber techniques.
He's the stormtrooper with the lightsaber.
Yes,
Yeah.
more
That sounds
compelling,
cool.
a more interesting version of the story that this one is telling. But again, this one is set primarily in Luke's head, and we get more sense of how the Force speaks to him, which is probably the most interesting part of the novel.
All right. So we have some intrigue as to an expansion on Luke and his mindset. Do we have the same with the next novel?
So the next novel, I mean, these are all very similar to each other. So I would say these are going to get slightly better as we go from this trilogy leading up to The Force Awakens about our three main characters. So this is another novel. It's called Smuggler's Run, a Han Solo and Chewbacca adventure. And I'm really grateful they included Chewbacca because he is one of the main characters of the book.
Oh, yes.
So this is Han Solo struggling with his identity as a hero of the rebellion because he's very uncomfortable with that. Like the previous novel, it has a prologue and epilogue set during the time period of The Force Awakens. But the primary part of the novel is showing a mission that Han Solo and Chewbacca take on the sake of the rebellion. The primary antagonist is an ISB commander who is trying to hunt down rebels. Uh, I would say it's one of the first new canon depictions, other than maybe the Tarkin novel, of the Imperial Security Bureau. So I would say that is one of the more interesting parts of the novel, and we do see Han engaging in some firefights and some subterfuge, some smuggling, some crazy plans that
Mhm.
end up fooling the Empire. And then we see him relying heavily on Chewbacca as a
Mhm.
true partner in that way. So again, the story is it's written in straightforward junior novel prose. It's not very long. Uh, so anyone who really likes Han Solo, likes Chewbacca, wants a quick read,
Mhm.
or a younger reader who really loves the character as well. And if you want to see, man, the growth of Han Solo from
Mhm.
Captain Solo to General Solo, this is filling in some of those pieces.
And by the sounds of it, we get a little bit more of a structure of the Empire.
Mm-hmm. And the
Mhm.
actual plot of this one is a little tighter. We have an actual antagonist. We
Mhm.
have some subterfuge. We have a little bit of more of a plot, and we do see, a complicated Imperial plan to snare some rebel agents. So in that sense, it's interesting, but not very intricate. Made for if you're a completionist, a younger reader, or really love Han Solo.
Mhm.
I'll give this one. I'll stick with my 2.5 rating for this one as well.
Gotcha. Anything else on Smuggler's Run?
Nope, that's about it. Again, not necessary at all to understand the character of Han Solo, but
And
um,
some color. Add some color to his characterization.
yeah. So then our third book in the trilogy leading up to The Force Awakens is called Moving Target, a Princess Leia Adventure. This one is set while Han Solo is frozen in carbonite between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. Uh, it's again a similar writing style and level to the previous two novels, Junior novel, and the Journey to the Force Awakens trilogy. This one is probably the best because we see Leia as a commander. So she has a ragtag group of Alliance operatives who are trying to gather the Empire's attention away from. So they're at this point, their whole alliance has figured out about the second Death Star, and it's almost like a broken the Enigma machine code World War II plot. They can't let the Empire know that they
Mhm.
know about the second Death Star until
Yeah.
their fleet's in position, unknowing that the Empire already knows that they know.
Oh, yeah.
So
Is
it's
this prior or post many Bothan deaths?
post the Bothan deaths,
Okay.
prior to rescuing Han Solo.
Gotcha.
So she leads this ragtag group of uh, rebel smugglers and operatives to go on a series of missions to draw the Empire's attention away from where they're gathering their fleets for Endor.
Mhm.
If anyone has played the series, um, or the game, the campaign mode in Star Wars Battlefront 2, you know that this is successful until Inferno Squadron infiltrates the rebellion and informs, oh, they're totally aware
Mhm.
and are gathering their fleet to attack at Endor,
Mhm.
which is why the Empire is then ready to launch their other fleet.
Sure.
But that aside, uh, yeah, so this one, again, is most interesting because we see Leia as a commander between these disparate group of people.
Mhm.
Most interesting is probably Nien Noob, who is Lando's co-pilot,
Mhm.
the Sullustan, who's Lando's co-pilot during Return of the Jedi.
Quick sidebar, which could be saved for another day, but racism in Star Wars. I always heard that Nien Nub was some sort of racial depiction, but I never knew of what.
Yeah, I'm not certain. I guess you could read Sullustans as being sort of a racially coded to Asian people,
Mhm.
but
It's not until we get the Nemoidians in the prequel trilogy that we get some egregious racial stereotypes in Star Wars, but that's a topic for another day.
yeah, but I would say Nien Nub is probably the most competent person in the novel aside from Leia,
Mhm.
because everyone else is a mess. You have Major Lock Marcha, who's like, I must murder every Imperial I see. And then you have a Sarian, who is the same race as Kiadi Mundi,
Okay.
a communications specialist who's more of a pacifist. So does not really get along with Lock Marcha at all.
My wife refers to that race as the ham heads because it looks like their head is just one large piece of ham.
Now that is racist against Sarians. So yeah, it's this ragtag group, and they're largely successful in their mission, but it's really hard for Leia to keep them all together. Again, it's short, uh, and you see Leia grappling with
Mhm.
extremism from the character of Major Lock Markshaw, who is disappointed that she is not as brutal in her killing of Imperials as he is,
Mhm.
and he's willing to even sacrifice their mission at times if he must to let's murder some more Imperials. So I would say this one has a tighter story and more interesting characters than the previous two in this trilogy. So I'll rate this one as a junior novel a 3 out of 5. As a work of Star Wars fiction, if you really are invested in the exact story and trajectory of how the Death Star 2 was discovered, and then the plans were stolen. But then, if you've also played Battlefront 2 and know that then they figured out, so if you're really interested in the lead up to the Battle of Endor, give this one a read. But this is primarily here to show how Leia was a commander in general, as she's depicted in The Force Awakens. But the later novel Bloodline does a much better job of that.
What we've talked about so far has really taken place prior to the original trilogy, during, a little bit after, but our next focus is going to be on a series of books that take place immediately after Return of the Jedi.
We have now reviewed the first a dozen or so expanded universe novels that were released after the Disney acquisition of Star Wars, but before the release of The Force Awakens. So, including novels leading up to the Rebels TV show, some other novels that had been in production of other series that were salvaged, and some other one-offs or interesting depictions that Disney greenlighted before they released their movie after buying Star Wars.
With some far more interesting YA inclusions than I anticipated, because usually those are just drivel. But from your descriptions, there are a couple that I would highly consider taking a look at.
Yeah, we will certainly get to the more money-hungry ones that I wouldn't recommend most people read. And of the ones we talked about in our first couple episodes here, Ezra's Gamble is by far the weakest, and is doing the least interesting things. And then the whole trilogy of novels leading Journey to the Force Awakens, again, fairly weak, but the rest of them, most of them have some or a great deal of value.
And would you say Lost Stars is your favorite out of this first bunch?
So yes, out of our first 2 episodes here, having looked at all of this dozen novels, I would say Lost Stars is probably my favorite due to having new characters and using them as a vehicle to explore a long time frame successfully. In second place, I'd probably put The Lords of the Sith for its depiction of Vader. And in third place, I would put A New Dawn for being the best of the Rebels prequel stories.
Excellent. I had a thought. So interesting that Lost Stars is the top of the list, and it doesn't include any of our Star Wars leads as protagonists. It's new characters. That should be a lesson to Disney.
Yeah, and as the weakest ones were ones that were taking pre-existing characters and not doing anything interesting with them. As we will get to later, there are some works featuring Leia and Luke that I'm highly interested in and would recommend, but nothing here that's particularly standing out. All right, well, that has been Alex and Connor in our first 2 episodes
reviewing the Expanded Universe novel series.
Join us next time for the novels that released during the period and after the period of The Force Awakens and leading up to The Last Jedi.
Thank you so much for listening. We've been talking Star Wars. We'll see you sometime soon in a galaxy right here.